All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar on gardening for water conservation. My name is Michaela Richardson. I'm the Big Sky Watershed Corps member for the Flathead Conservation District, and I will be facilitating tonight's webinar. So before diving into the webinar and presentation, I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping items and do some introductions. So to start, if you find you're having any connectivity issues, you can try turning off your video. Sometimes this can help improve your connection speed. Also, if you could please keep yourself muted at all times unless you're speaking. This will just help prevent any background noise. And I'm also able to go in and mute you if you can't quite figure it out. It's on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. You'll also see on the top right-hand corner, there's a button that says speaker view. You can toggle between speaker view and gallery view. When you're in speaker view, it allows you to only see the person who is talking. So during the presentation, this might be nice and can help limit distractions as well. And then also as we go through the presentation, we may mention different resources or websites, and I will post those in the comment box as we go, so you'll be able to have access to them. And also this webinar is being recorded, and so the video as well as additional resources will be available on our website within a few days. In case you happen to miss anything tonight, you'll be able to access it later. And then to start with, so a few introductions. Again, my name is Michaela. We have our presenter, Haley Graff. She's our resource conservationist with the Flathead Conservation District, who will be presenting tonight. And we also have Samantha Tappenbeck. She's our Conservation Programs Manager, given a wave there on the screen, who is here tonight as well. So the webinar is going to start with a presentation by Haley that will last 45 minutes to an hour. And then after that, we will have an open discussion and a question and answer session. If you happen to have a question during the presentation, please just place that in the chat box, and we will start with those at the beginning of our question and answer session. And then also at the very end, we are also going to put a link to a survey, and we highly encourage you to fill that out as well. It's just great for us to know how we can improve these kinds of events in the future, and we can also report and track what participants learn as. This is very important to us. So with further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Haley.
All right, thanks, Michaela. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with everyone so you can see my PowerPoint. All right, can everybody see that? All right, thanks for the thumbs up, Samantha. Okay, so thanks for joining me tonight for this webinar on gardening for water conservation. The concepts that we'll be talking about tonight can be applied to a lot of different spaces and a lot of different landscapes, whether you've got a small yard or you're looking to conserve water across a much bigger property, such as a pasture, or even if you're talking about gardening, such as a vegetable garden. All of these different methods can be used just about anywhere. So it should apply to everybody here tonight. The content of this presentation is going to focus on sort of two different themes. We're going to spend the bulk of our discussion talking about methods to actually reduce the amount of water that you're using. And in this section, we're going to talk about xeriscaping and the 7 principles of xeriscaping. We're also going to talk about native plants and plant selection, lawn alternatives, different watering systems, and the importance of getting to know your soil. Now, the idea of getting to know your soil is going to kind of transition us into the second theme of the presentation, which is methods to protect our water. So in this, we're also going to cover non-point source pollution, what that is, what it's caused by, and how to prevent it. We're going to talk about rain gardens, and then we'll briefly touch on riparian areas and wetlands. So we have a lot to get through tonight, and many of the topics that I'll be going over could be 1-hour presentations in their own right. And in fact, several of the topics covered tonight have been or will be their own 1-hour webinar presentations. So a lot of the topics tonight are going to be sort of the intro discussion, the 101 course, if you will. So if you have questions or you want a deeper dive into any of these topics, we're going to be trying to provide you with some of those resources as we go along. Like Michaela mentioned, we'll be posting some websites that you can check out, things like that in the comment box. But I also really encourage you to post those questions in the comment box for the question and answer session. Because we can go as deep into any subject as you want. You guys will be the ones asking those questions during that discussion, so ask whatever it is that you want to know more about. All right. So let's jump in with xeriscaping. Some of you may or may not have heard the word xeriscaping before. The word xeriscaping comes from basically a combination of the word landscaping and the Greek word for dry, which is xeros. And some people pronounce this sort of as xeriscaping, but the idea is that it's landscaping or gardening which requires little or no irrigation. Many people think of the need to conserve water or garden with little or no irrigation for desert areas such as Arizona, places like that. But Montana is considered semi-arid state, so we don't actually receive very much rainfall, and we need to be really conscientious about that because we are also the headwaters of a really large watershed that contributes the water all the way down to the ocean. So we need to conserve our water and protect the flathead watershed. And xeriscaping can be implemented not just to save water, but also to ensure the success of your garden. Because if we are conserving water and we're making sure that we're targeting that water where it needs to go, you'll do a better job of ensuring that your plants are receiving the appropriate amount of water and are going to be the most drought tolerant and the most disease resistant, things like that. Okay, so there are 7 different principles of xeriscaping that we're going to go through briefly. But there's also a lot of overlap between these xeriscaping principles and some of the topics that we're going to touch on later. So I hope I won't be too repetitive, but we might touch on things a couple of times. I'll do a deeper dive on a few of these later on in the presentation. So the first principle of xeriscaping is planning and design. And this is basically a reminder that you need to think ahead, and you can't just run straight to the nursery and grab whatever plants that catch your eye or whatever's on sale and just chuck it in the ground and hope that it's going to flourish and do well. You're probably going to spend a lot of time and money and waste a lot of water if that's what you're doing. Instead, you need to back up and you need to consider a few things before you put any plants in the ground. Some of those things that you're going to need to consider, probably first and foremost, is an irrigation system. That's going to be a large part of what we talk about tonight. And I'll go into deeper about watering systems here in a little bit. But the main point is that different plants need different amounts of water, and you need to know how you're going to be getting that appropriate amount of water to those different plants. Are you going to be hand watering? Do you even have time for that? Do you enjoy dragging hoses around from one side of the yard to the other? If not, we've got some tips and tricks of how to avoid that and how to avoid wasting that water. So irrigation is a really big thing that you need to be thinking through. All right, next in your planning and design phase, you should probably also think about hardscaping. If you've got maybe just a single tree that you're putting in the middle of your yard, this may not be such a big topic. But if you're tackling a bigger project, you need to think through some of those other items, like, are you going to be putting mulch down? Are you going to do any edging or weed matting? Things like that. Is it going to be next to your house, or is it going to be out in a field? You need to think through that process, because it's going to affect, again, your irrigation system and everything else. You'll also need to think through weeds and pests. How are you going to manage your noxious weeds? Are you going to hand pull them? Are you going to spray them? Some combination thereof. And also, how are you going to protect your plants from both deer and voles? Even if you buy plants that are deer resistant, many young plants are still susceptible to being browsed on by deer. The younger plants tend to be just a little bit sweeter, just a little bit tastier, and so they can get munched on. And you're probably going to need to put some kind of temporary cage or fence around those younger plants to protect them. You'll also want to account for your budget. So obviously, the larger the plants you're buying, the larger the cost. So you may think that you're going to save a little bit of money by planting smaller plants or by seeding. Seeding is obviously going to be your cheaper option, but those seeds are also going to be competing against weed seeds. So you need to have a plan in place for your noxious weed management before you enter into that. Finally, don't forget to consider the different attributes that you have at your actual site. When you're planning your garden and you're picking what plants are going to go where, you need to consider if you've got a really windy site. Do you have a dry site? Is it full sun exposure? Or maybe you've got some areas of shade with some mature trees that are overtopping them. Or maybe even you have some areas that flood every year and you need to plan for some species that like more water. But overall, in the planning and design phase for xeriscaping, my biggest recommendation is to start small. I'll probably say this a million times throughout the rest of the presentation, but it's really easy to get in over your head with any gardening or landscaping project. So start one thing at a time, think it all the way through from planning down to maintenance, and only bite off what you can chew at one time, complete it, and then move on to the next thing. This will really ensure that each project that you take on is successful. All right, so the next principle of xeriscaping is soil improvement. We're going to get into soil health a little bit more later on, but the biggest thing and the biggest takeaway for xeriscaping is that healthy soil holds more water. So if you want to conserve water and you want to make sure that your plants are getting plenty of water, you need to have healthy soil. Healthy soil is really the foundation for all of the rest of this. So all right, so we'll get into healthy soil a little bit more later on, but just remember that everything kind of starts there. It starts with healthy soil. All right, the next principle of xeriscaping is practical turf area. So when we talk about turf area, we're generally talking about your lawn, right? So your lawn, you need to consider both the size of your lawn and what your lawn is made up of. An estimated 50% of the water used in watering lawns goes wasted due to evaporation, leaks, and overwatering. So to avoid wasting this water, don't water during the heat of the day, because a substantial amount of the water that you apply to your lawn, if it's the middle of the day, obviously it will evaporate before it is absorbed into the soil. So the best times to water your turf or your lawn area is going to be late in the evening or early in the morning. For an easy method to tell if your lawn needs watered, you can do what we call the step test. And so that's what this picture is depicting here. To do the step test, basically just step on your grass. Place your foot down on your grass or your turf and then lift your foot up and look at your grass. If your grass springs back really quickly, it's got plenty of water and it doesn't need any additional water yet. If you lift up your foot and the grass slowly comes back up, or it takes a minute, but it does come back up, that's kind of the sweet spot. That says that your grass could use a little water, but it's not to the wilting point yet. Conversely, if you step on the grass and when you lift your foot, that grass stays depressed and it doesn't come back up at all, that tells you that your grass is at the wilting point and it definitely needs some more water. So that's just something simple and easy that you can do to avoid overwatering your lawn. All right, you can also reduce the amount of water your lawn needs by seeding grasses that are warm season grasses that just naturally don't require as much water. So some warm season grasses include Bermuda grasses, and these types of grasses compared to cold season grasses are just adapted to slightly differently. They just don't need as much water. The downside of these grasses is that these are the ones that will turn brown in the winter. So think that through and think through what your aesthetics are and what your values are before you seed the grasses, and whether you want to weigh the pros and cons of your grass turning brown in the winter, but using less water. So something like a Bermuda grass or another warm season grass might work for you. All right, and if you've already got grass established in your lawn and you want to incorporate some of these more warm season grasses, an easy way to do that is to just overseed in the fall or early winter. Even after we've had our first snowfall, you can go out there and you can sprinkle a little bit of grass seed, just add it to your existing lawn, and that grass seed will overwinter and then germinate early in the spring and will just easily get incorporated that way. Okay. And then when you're considering practical turf area as a principle for xeriscaping, you also want to consider just the overall extent and the amount of lawn that you have. If you want to reduce the amount of grass that you have, we have lots of options for lawn alternatives, and we're going to get into that a little bit more. But again, I want to reiterate, if you're considering reducing the amount of lawn space that you have, to start small. A good example would be to plant a berm or a landscape, bite off that project, get it completed, start to finish, and then maybe next year or next spring, start a new project. Another example would be converting some of your lawn into a pollinator plot. A lot of these projects, when you're converting a lawn to something else, require a lot of upfront work, but then in the long run are lower maintenance and require a lot less water. Okay. So principle number 4 is efficient irrigation. So this gets back to the planning and design principle, and you want to plan for how much water individual plants are going to need. So you'll need to know what plants you're planting and what their specific needs are, and then you need a plan for how to get that amount of water to those plants. So if you're watering by hand, you're dragging a hose around, or you're carrying a bucket or something like that around, it's by far the least efficient. You're going to be wasting your time and you're going to be wasting a lot of water. Sprinklers are sort of the next in the line of efficiency. They cover a larger area, but some of the water is going to evaporate before it's absorbed by the soil. It's also really easy to overwater if you're using sprinklers if you haven't calculated the amount of water that your sprinklers are actually outputting. But a general rule of thumb, if you're watering with a sprinkler or if you're watering by hand, is to water more frequently for shorter durations. So an example is if you water your lawn or your landscaping once a week for 5 hours, what's going to happen is you're going to completely saturate that soil, and a lot of that water is just going to run off either above the soil or below it, and it's not actually going to be available for your plant. Alternatively, if you water once a day for 20 minutes, you're going to hit that sweet spot where you've got nice moist soil, but it's not inundated and you're not wasting all that water. And when I talk about watering systems here in a little bit, again, we're going to do a deeper dive and we'll talk about some of the tools that you have at your disposal to make that watering strategy a little bit more efficient and a little easier. All right, then moving on in the direction of more efficient irrigation, probably my favorite is to use a drip line system. Using this type of system, you can provide individual plants with a specific amount of water that they need with little or no wasted water. It's really targeted and it's really efficient. All right. Principle 7 of xeriscaping is to use mulch. So a lot of people think of wood mulch like it's pictured here when we talk about this, but mulch is technically any substance that you spread around your plants. Wood mulch is obviously a popular one. A popular mulch in gardening, like in your vegetable garden, is straw. Popular mulch in a lot of landscaping around businesses and homes is actually rock. And then a mulch that you see occasionally that I really like is something like crushed recycled glass. And every once in a while, although it's pretty rare, you will see something like recycled tires as a mulch. And basically, mulch helps to conserve water in our gardening because it blocks the sun from the soil. And when it does that, it moderates the soil temperature. So it keeps the soil temperature warmer when it's cold and cooler when it's really hot out. This in turn means that the moisture in the soil doesn't evaporate as readily, that mulch holds that moisture into the soil. Doesn't matter if it's a rock mulch, a glass mulch, or a wood mulch, it all has that same benefit of shading the soil and holding that moisture in. But a big concept here that I want to touch on is that you should never have bare soil. If you have bare soil, maybe because of a construction project or because you started a landscaping project but weren't able to get it finished, that bare soil is going to dry out, it's going to lose its soil structure, and eventually you're going to have noxious weeds come in, and they're going to be the only thing that's going to want to grow. And you're going to be fighting those noxious weeds and that poor soil health for a long time, and you're going to create a lot more work for yourself. So if you've got bare soil and you can't get to it right away, one of the easiest strategies is to put down some mulch, even if it's temporary. Put down some straw or some cheap wood chips that will eventually break down and become compost in there. And then you can get back to that site at a later date and you'll be preventing weeds from coming in and maintaining your soil health and your soil structure. All right, principle 6 of xeriscaping is low water use plants. So like I mentioned before, different plants require different amounts of water to thrive, obviously. And the principles in xeriscaping really encourage you to select plants that are drought tolerant, plants that need the least amount of water to do well. You don't have to plant exclusively drought tolerant plants, but obviously the more of these types of plants that you use, the less water that you're going to be using. So when you're selecting your plant, pay attention to how much water they need. When you're purchasing them at a nursery, for example, read the tag on there and note if it's a plant that needs a lot of water or if it's pretty drought tolerant. Then when you're designing your garden, also make sure to group your plants by their different water needs. So you'll create some areas that are low water, medium water, and need a lot of water, excuse me. So don't plant something that needs a lot of water right next to something that needs very little water, because it doesn't matter how much water you put down in that area, neither plant is going to be happy. Now you can cheat a little bit on that if you're using a drip system, because like I mentioned, you can target individual plants with different amounts of water. So a drip system is a way that you can kind of get around this and plant whichever plant species you want all mixed in together. Okay, now if you want to plant species that require more water, so not these drought tolerant species, but something that needs or likes to be wet a lot more often, make sure that you're planning ahead and putting that in an area that gets a lot of shade. Maybe it's on the north side of your house, or consider finding an area that is a natural depression in your landscape so that you can put it somewhere where water will naturally run down to that location and it'll receive a little bit more water sort of naturally, and you won't have to provide it that much more water. All right, the seventh principle of xeriscaping is to do the appropriate maintenance. So if planning and design is one side of the gardening coin, maintenance is the other. The more you plan ahead, the less maintenance you're going to have to do down the road, and the more water you'll conserve in the long run. So if you go around just chucking plants in the ground without a plan, you're going to regret it when it comes to maintenance, because you're going to have to do a lot more watering, a lot more weeding. For example, if you plant containerized plants, but you don't put any mulch around them, you're going to spend a ton of time weeding and a ton of time fighting maybe something like grass incursion, things like that. And also, if you throw a bunch of seed down without taking the time to prep that site and do the appropriate noxious weed removal, your seeds may not germinate at all. They may have too much competition. So again, start small, plan ahead, complete one project at a time, and don't bite off more than you can chew, because you'll regret it when it comes to maintenance. All right, so that covers it for xeriscaping. Now we're going to move on to native plants. If you want to find a way to conserve water in your landscaping and your gardening, native plants is one of the best ways to do it. Native plants are a great choice. Now, you're not always going to be able to do native plants, or you're not always going to want native plants. Maybe you have a particular plant that's your favorite, and that's fine. But if you can select native plants when they're an option and when it's feasible, you will save water. Native plants generally need less water simply because they're adapted to our local ecosystems. They are sort of by default drought tolerant. Like the ponderosa pine tree that's shown in the picture here, they are used to areas that have these fluctuating temperature cycles, and they're hardy to our climate, and they're used to going through cyclic droughts where we just don't get very much water, and they have adaptations to get through that. A lot of our non-native plants won't have those same adaptations, and you're going to have to baby them a little bit more and give them a little bit more water. Native plants also have the benefit of being more disease resistant than some of our non-natives will. And they've adapted to our local pests and diseases, but then also because they are drought resistant, it makes them less susceptible to diseases because they stay healthy. So a non-native plant, even if it looks fine, if it's a little bit stressed because it's not getting water, it will be more susceptible to some kind of disease or pest. As a side benefit, native plants also provide a lot of habitat for our pollinators and our wildlife. So. All right, if you want to take the guesswork out of shopping for native plants, there's a couple of resources that you can check out. One of the first ones that I'll talk about is the plant list that the Center for Native Plants in Whitefish has come up with. Their staff there is really knowledgeable, and if you have any questions about shopping for a native plant or which native plant is going to work for you, I recommend contacting them or checking out their nursery. So I think Michaela's going to try to post that, a link to that list in the comment box. But a couple of the native plants that you see pictured here up in the left corner, that's blue flax. Below that is buffalo berry. In the center is rubber rabbit brush. And on the right-hand side is purple prairie clover. So these are all a few examples of drought-tolerant native plants that you can purchase locally. And these make great additions to any garden. All right. So we briefly touched on considering your lawn space or practical turf areas during xeriscaping, but I want to get in a little bit more to the concept of lawn alternatives. So when you're thinking about lawn alternatives, you're talking about ways to change the composition of what's in your lawn area or to actually reduce the size of your lawn. So with a traditional lawn, as shown in this diagram, you could imagine mowing a great big area. You'd spend your weekends behind the lawnmower or the weed eater. This diagram shows a lot of water being used and also fertilizer. Now, ideally, if you bring in some of these lawn alternatives, you could be like the family on the right in this picture, where you're relaxing and reading a book and the kids are frolicking with the dog and everything looks really happy. So this picture may be a bit of an exaggeration, and I can't promise that if you use lawn alternatives, it will be a utopia, but I can promise that if you use lawn alternatives, in the long run, you'll use less water and it'll be less maintenance. So if you're interested in transitioning from a traditional lawn to a lawn alternative, you've got some options on how to go about that. So one of the first options that a lot of people like is to remove some of their lawn area and plant containerized plants with mulch. So again, I'm incorporating those different principles that we talked about in xeriscaping. You want to make sure that you have mulch. Don't just remove your turf or your lawn area and leave bare ground. So pick an area when you're doing this, but make sure to start small. Like I mentioned several times, don't get in over your head. So maybe you've got an area under a window that could really use some beautiful shrubs and some flowers. Maybe you want to establish an area for your kids to play, so they've got a little bit of a playground and you don't want to be mowing around all of that playground equipment. Or maybe you've got something like a ditch or a drainage area that is really awkward to mow and you want to put it to better use. So these are all situations where you could take an area of your lawn and remove that turf and put in something different. To do this, however, you're going to have to completely remove that sod, that grass. You can do that with a sod cutter and then physically removing it, or you could do a series of herbicide treatments where you're killing off that grass. But once grass is established, it's pretty tenacious, so you might have to really make a couple of efforts to kill off or remove that grass before you do something else. If you just put weed matting down over top of an existing lawn, it's not really going to be effective. That grass will just grow right up through it in no time. So you'll have to remove it before you put in your containerized plantings. All right, another option as a lawn alternative is microclover. Microclover is really great if you want to maintain the look of a lawn, if you want to that open, flat, smooth surface that that everybody loves and admires, then micro clover might be for you. Clover used to be a common additive in a lot of grass, or excuse me, a lot of lawn mixes. But when broadleaf herbicides and chemicals used to that could target everything except grass, when those broadleaf herbicides came into popularity, clover fell out of vogue in our lawns. And that's simply because people want to be able to put down that generic weed and feed mixture periodically without thinking about it too much. And that weed and feed mixture, like I said, it's a broadleaf herbicide and it kills everything except the grass. So obviously it's going to kill that clover. And it's a real shame that we do that and that clover has fallen out of use in our lawns recently, because clover is so beneficial. Clover is a nitrogen fixer, so it's really beneficial to our lawns. Let's see. Oh, yep, there I am. Sorry, checking my notes. Clover, it also requires a lot less water, and it's a lot more competitive against noxious weeds than our grasses is. So something like red clover will actually outcompete knapweed, for example, whereas our grass won't necessarily do that. So something like clover also requires a lot less maintenance overall than our grass does. So it's a real shame that we're not using this a whole lot in our lawns anymore. And I'd really encourage you to look into this more if you're interested in this. Now, micro clover specifically has been cultivated to grow shorter than normal clover with finer leaves. So the leaves are almost grass blade like, and it produces little to no flowers. So if you're concerned about having, the grandkids run across the lawn and get stung by a bee, micro clover is a good option because it doesn't produce those blooms like a regular clover will. And also, you don't have to mow it. Some sites and some of the research that I've done says that if you want it to become even denser and shorter when it's first growing in the spring, you can mow it once, maybe twice. But after that, it shouldn't need it at all. So that's a huge benefit if you're looking to save time. But overall, the biggest benefit of clover for this discussion is that clover needs less water than a traditional lawn does. Clover will naturally stay green longer than your grass will with less water. So you don't have to continuously irrigate a micro clover lawn to keep that bright green, beautiful look. Whereas with a traditional lawn, it would start to go brown if you didn't continuously water it, particularly this time of year. If you're interested in micro clover seed, I haven't yet found anywhere locally that sells it, but it is readily available online. All right. Your next option for a lawn alternative is to use native grasses. This is a really great, super low maintenance, super drought tolerant option, but keep in mind, this is not something that you'll be mowing. A lot of our native grasses are actually bunch grasses, so they grow in a clump. They don't grow in that smooth mat like you would expect to see in a lawn. So don't plant native grasses thinking that you're gonna use it in your front lawn as a turf area. This might be appropriate for, say, if you've got a full acre of yard and you're sick of mowing the back 40, go ahead and transition that back part of your lawn into an area that you're not mowing and an area that is native grasses. So if you want to incorporate native grasses into what you've already got, again, the easiest method for that is going to be overseeding. So in the late fall or early winter, throw down that native grass seed. And if you do that every year, you'll slowly transition existing turf grasses into those drought tolerant native grasses. It'll take a couple years, but it's a pretty cheap and cost-effective method for doing that. If you're interested in purchasing native grass seed locally, we have a couple of options for you. So if Michaela will post the link to a page on our website about our native grass program, you guys can check that out later on. But basically, we worked with NRCS to create a couple of grass mixes for you. And there's 3 different grass mixes. One is the valley mix, one is the forest mix, and then there's also the reclamation grass mix. Now, obviously, the forest mix is better for uses in slightly shaded areas. The valley mix does really well in sort of the valley bottom area. It's more of a pasture type grass, full sun exposure. And then the reclamation mix would be good if you are in a wetter site or you're trying to do some stream bank stabilization or a stream restoration project, then the reclamation mix would be for you. Now, these grass mixes are sold locally at CHS in Kalispell. So if you want to pick up a bag, they carry all 3 mixes, and you can stop by anytime to the CHS office and get it. All right. Now, the final option is a lawn alternative that I'm going to talk about tonight is using pollinator plots. So if you want to transition some of your yard into a pollinator plot, unfortunately, you can't just throw down the seed and expect all these beautiful wildflowers to pop up. Wildflowers can have a really difficult time competing against grass if that's what you've already got, and they'll have an even harder time competing against our noxious weeds. So if you want to plant a pollinator plot, you do have to really put in the time and effort to prepare that site for the best success. The pictures that we have here on the screen, these are pictures from our pollinator plots that we have here at the demonstration garden. If you ever want to swing by and check out what we've got going on and what we did, you're welcome to do so. You can get a tour of the demonstration garden. But also wanted to let you know about one of our programs. This is a landowner assistance program that we have for you, and it's called the Flathead Pollinator Initiative. I think Michaela will post a link to this one as well. So if you're interested in using a pollinator plot, check out this program. This is a really great program where we can offer you some technical assistance in designing your plot, figuring out where to put your plot, how big to make your plot, and what site prep that you should go through to ensure the best success for what you've got going on at your individual spot. We can also offer through this program free native wildflower seeds. So if you'd like to sign up for this program, check out that website. There's a lot more information there as well as an interest form. Go ahead and download that form, fill it out, and send it to Samantha, who is the program manager for this particular program. And we'll schedule an on-site visit and get you rolling on that. If you want a deeper dive into the site prep that you're going to have to go through for a pollinator plot and what you can expect in that process, tune in next week to a webinar that we're hosting, which is fall seeding and planting for pollinators. All right. Okay, so let's move on to watering systems. Throughout this presentation, I've talked a lot about how water is wasted if it's applied improperly. So in talking about watering systems, we're going to talk about how to properly apply your water so that none of your water or very little of your water is wasted. You've got lots of different options to sort of tailor make your watering system to suit you and your needs. I'm going to talk about these different methods here, and you can use a couple of them or all of them. It's really up to you and your budget and what you need for your space. So the first one I want to talk about is timers. And I personally love using timers because it saves me time. Now, I mentioned earlier that if you are watering, you want to water in the late evening and the early morning so that the least amount of spray from your sprinkler is evaporating. Well, if you enjoy getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go turn your sprinkler on, you're going to want a timer. And timers can be as simple as the one shown in the upper left-hand corner, and can get really complex and complicated all the way up to ones that you control from your phone through an app. So the simple timers, basically you screw it on to your water spigot outside and hook your hose up to that. You program it to say what the current date and time is, and then you tell it how often and how long you want it to water. They run generally on AA batteries, and they're fairly inexpensive and can be picked up at most hardware stores locally. So that's a really great option. I use these, for example, if I'm doing something like going camping over Labor Day weekend and I don't want my flowers to die on my back deck, I can rig up a quick sprinkler to water just those pots and tell it to water for 20 minutes once a day for the next 3 days. That's a great option. Now, sort of your middle option as far as cost and complexity goes is going to be a control box that you can set different irrigation zones, and you can do a little bit more complex watering schedules. For me, I live in a neighborhood, and we are all on a communal well. And so to conserve water as a neighborhood, we have a rule that you can only water on even or odd days according to your address. But that gets a little bit complicated because some of our months are 30 days and some of them are 31, obviously. So if I use one of these more simple timers and I set it to just water every other day, then pretty quickly it gets out of sync and I'm watering on the wrong day according to my covenances. So we invested in one of these more complicated control boxes, but what that means is I can set the date in there and I can tell it to water on even days of the calendar. So that's really useful for me. Now at work, we went even one step further because here at the demonstration garden, I wanted to be able to check on the watering system and make sure there wasn't something like a leak, or be able to adjust it while I was on vacation. And I can do all of that from my phone. So it's really up to you and your level of complexity and the amount of money you want to invest in this, but timers are worth every penny. All right, now if you want to go even fancier, I would recommend investing in a evapotranspiration sensor or an ET sensor. Now, this is not a huge investment. They're generally around $100, and depending on what irrigation system you have, most companies make some kind of ET sensor that can be used as an add-on to any kind of control box. The one pictured here obviously is made by Hunter, and it's called the Wireless Rain Link. Now, these are fun because they connect to your Wi-Fi and talk back with the device that you see in the upper right-hand corner that you install outside. And that little device, that's the actual ET sensor, is measuring things like, it's measuring your local climate. It's measuring rainfall, humidity, temperature, things like that. Now, the previous one that I talked about, if I go back, these ones where you're controlling from your phone, they're using predictive watering, where it's tying in with your Wi-Fi and using the local weather station to predict what the weather is going to be and just adjust the water accordingly. So if it's going to rain, it maybe won't water. If it's predicted to be sunny and hot, it might water a little bit longer. But as we all know, weather predictions are not always accurate. These ET sensors are great because it is recording real-time live data of what's going on in your specific site. So if you are in an area that has a little bit of its own microclimate, like for your house, the Weather Channel always gets it wrong, maybe this little ET sensor is going to be for you, because it's going to tell your system exactly what's going on, and it's going to use that data to predict how much water your plants in your garden are losing due to evapotranspiration. So evapotranspiration is basically the process of when the plant is breathing and it's opening its stomata to take in air, it loses some of that moisture from the plant. And by collecting the data, this sensor will know that and will tell your system to water more or water less based on what it's picking up. So those are pretty nifty little devices. All right, the next kind of watering system that I want to touch on is drip lines. I mentioned these briefly because I love that you can target different plants with different amount of water. So you can conserve a lot of water that way because you're not overwatering some plants and underwatering others. To use this system, it's pretty simple. Basically, you start with a trunk line that's generally 3/4 of an inch. This is what's shown in brown in that upper left-hand picture. And you can connect this right up to your outdoor spigot, or if you've got an irrigation system going, you can tap into that and use an adapter to pipe in more of this trunk line. You'd run that trunk line out to whatever area you're going to be watering. Most people choose to bury this, like if you're running across your lawn or something like that, you would dig a trench and bury it. But another strategy is if you've got some plantings that need water, maybe just for the first couple of years while they're getting established, like you've got a couple of trees in your backyard that you want to run water to, you can just run it across the surface temporarily and then know that you're going to remove it in 3 years or so when it's no longer needed. So you run that trunk line out, and then off of the trunk line, you use that little 1/4 inch distribution tubing that's black in that picture. And then at each plant, you put on a little nozzle that is a flow regulator. And these flow regulators, they come in different sizes, such as 1/2 liter per hour or 2 gallons per hour. And what that means is if you have a plant that needs a ton of water, obviously you put a faster dripper on it. If you have a plant that is drought tolerant and it really doesn't need that much water, you can control that flow and put a slower dripper on it. So that's a pretty handy system. And if you set it up right, it's something that you can add on to and take away as you're changing your plantings or you're creating new areas, or even just moving your garden beds around as to what vegetables you're putting where. You can pretty easily adapt these systems to get that watering where you need it. All right, rain barrels. Rain barrels are really just a way of capturing runoff from generally your roof and making use of it later. So this just means that for every gallon of water you capture in a rain barrel and use, that's 1 less gallon that you need to get out of your hose and your spigot. So there's a variety of different types of rain barrels. They're all fairly simple in design. You can get ones that are pre-made. They're available at a lot of hardware stores, places like Home Depot or Wayfair. And in fact, I did just notice this morning that some places are having Labor Day sales this weekend. So if you're interested in investing in a rain barrel, now might be the time. But you can also make homemade rain barrels like the ones that are pictured on the left. If you're going to do this, I would just make sure to add some screen to the top. This will prevent mosquitoes from getting in there and laying mosquito eggs in there. So. But if you want to make your own, there's tons of directions and how-to tutorials available online on places like Pinterest, things like that. So this can be a great method for conserving water that's pretty easy. Okay, and finally for watering systems, I want to talk about your gutter downspouts. Your gutter downspouts can be incorporated into a rain barrel pretty easily. You saw that in a lot of those pictures on the last slide. But in general, gutter downspouts are sort of forgotten about source of water. They collect a lot of water from your roof, and then that water just pools onto the ground 2 feet from the foundation of your house and probably runs down next to your foundation and goes in your crawl space. So that's never good. We don't want that. So here's a lot of strategies that you can use to not only divert that gutter water away from your foundation and your crawl space, but then put it to use. So there's some neat little devices like the one in the upper left-hand corner where when it fills with water, it rolls out and it becomes a little mini sprinkler system. So you can plant something accordingly. Maybe you've got a nice little flower bed that's near your near the edge of your house, and you can plant a water-loving plant right there that's going to make use of that water after it rains. Another one is if you want to get that gutter a little farther away from your house, you can look at the illustration that is in the upper right-hand corner. Now this is the system that I would probably recommend the most, because you can put a gutter downspout extension and bury it underneath of your lawn or a path, and you can run it quite a ways out and have it come up and deposit that water from your gutter near something else that you want to water. So maybe you have a tree that's 15 feet away from your house and it needs a lot more water and it's just not getting it. You can divert your gutter system all the way over there, and instead of dragging a hose to that tree, you rely on that saved water. Other options for diverting your gutter is to do something like a dry stream bed, like you see on the lower left, where that dry stream bed looks like it's actually leading into a rain garden and capturing that water for the plants down below towards the street. We'll talk about rain gardens a lot more later. So a couple examples for you. All right, now let's talk about getting to know your soil. We're gonna use this topic as a transition from conserving water to, I mean, when I say conserving water, I mean reducing the amount of water that you're using, to sort of the other conserving water, which is the actual conservation of water. So protecting our water resources in our local waterways. And this whole topic gets back to the idea of healthy soil holds more water. I mentioned that earlier when we were talking about the principles of xeriscaping. One of those principles is soil improvements, and the idea that if you have poor soil, you should work to improve the health of that. And that's all because healthy soil holds more water. So how does that happen? Well, all soils have a different holding capacity, and it's basically the amount of water that can be held in place between the different particles of the soil for a given amount of time. So this water that's held by the soil is called the plant available water. So as you can see on this diagram here, if you've got a given material with some pore space and you add a bunch of water, you're gonna hit the saturation point where basically the soil can't hold any more water and that water runs out. That water may run out on the surface and you'll see it, or that water may infiltrate into our groundwater and be lost below surface. But basically that excess water was depicted by splashing into the pan below the diagram. All of that water is not being used by your plants. So this is that situation where you're watering your lawn once a week for 5 hours instead of watering your lawn once a day for 20 minutes. So on the far side, alternatively, you have the wilting point. This is where you've got that pore space for your plant roots, but there's no water there. So if you reach this point, that's where we talk about, you do the step test in your lawn, and when you pick your foot up, the plants don't come up, they don't recover, they stay depressed. So what you want is that happy medium. You want nice, moist soil that can hold a lot of water, but that's not saturated and wasting water. All right, so to do this, it all depends on your soil texture and your structure. So soil texture refers to basically the grain size of your soil. So the larger grain size that we're going to talk about is sand. So sand, you can feel it, it's gritty. It's got a pretty big particle size. It also has pretty big space between those particles. So it doesn't hold a lot of water for very long. You can think of when you have sand in your hand, the water drips out quite quickly. On the other side of the spectrum is clay. Clay is a very small particle size. The pore space between those particles is also very small. So clay does not hold water very well. It's got a very low water holding capacity. So if you have soil that's very high in clay and you water it a lot, you may see pooling standing water on top of that clay and think that your plants have plenty of water. But because that pore space is so small and the water holding capacity of clay is so low, there's not actually very much water available to those plants between the particulates of the clay. So what's happening is that water is just sitting on top of that clay surface. It's not really being held by that soil. So your plant roots that are down in that soil don't have access to that water. So knowing the soil texture and the size of materials that you have in your soil is very important for knowing how much water you're going to need to apply and how often and when and those sorts of things. Now, soil structure can also be dependent on how much organic material you have in your soil. So organic material, you know, things is like partially decomposed wood, stuff like that. And it's going to affect basically whether your soil is nice and loose and fluffy or whether it's hard packed and holds together in clumps. So if you want to look at these things, the soil texture and the soil structure to find out what your water capacity is, there's an easy DIY, do-it-yourself test that you can do at home. And so basically to do this, go get some soil samples. You don't need very much soil, but grab a little bit, just, you know, you don't need to dig up your lawn or anything, but get down a little bit into the zone of soil where the roots are going to be and collect that, mix it all together and put it in a funnel lined with a coffee filter. Then you're going to need about a half a cup of soil is all, so you don't need a ton. But then once you put the soil in the funnel with the coffee filter, pour 2 cups of water all over that soil, making sure to saturate the soil all the way around. Then you're going to wait 5 minutes. And then you're going to measure the amount of water that ran through your soil and ended up in the container below your funnel. I should have mentioned that before. Don't just pour the funnel into the sink. Make sure you've got the funnel sitting in a jar or a container of some kind, because you're going to measure that water. Now, the difference between the amount of water that you started with, that 2 cups, and the amount of water that you measure in your container, that difference is your water holding capacity. So if you look at the picture here, that funnel looks like it's got mostly sand in it. I would expect to see a lot of that water come through. Alternatively, if you've got a lot of clay soils, you're gonna see that you're gonna have a hard time pouring that water in there. It's gonna sit on top a lot, but once it finally does come through after 5 minutes, you're not gonna have very much water in the bottom. There's probably gonna be water sitting on top of that clay layer. But in any case, it'll give you a good indication of what your water is doing as it's passing through your soil. Okay, so now that you know that if you saturate or overwater your soil, the excess water runs off, I want to talk about how that excess water and that runoff can be bad for our local waterways. So we're switching gears a little bit from reducing the amount of water that you use in your garden to protecting our local waterways. So excess runoff can be bad for our local waterways because that water, as it's running across the landscape, has a tendency to pick up pollutants. These pollutants are called non-point source pollution because they come from a variety of dispersed sources. And as that water runs across the landscape, it picks up these pollutants and then goes directly untreated into our waterways. A lot of people think that when we have stormwater runoff or when you water your lawn too much and it runs into this gutter in the street and into a storm drain, people have a tendency to think that that water is going to the water treatment facility before being discharged, and that's not correct. All of that stormwater runoff and the excess water goes directly into our streams, along with any pollution that it picks up along the way. So some examples of this pollution, this non-point source pollution that we're talking about, is oil and grease from your car, excess fertilizer that you've applied to your lawn, or maybe that's been used in an agricultural setting, animal waste, trash, and even sediment. So this just highlights why you shouldn't overwater. If you're overwatering, that water is going to pick up all these different pollutants and they're going to find their way into our waterways. It's much better to make use of the tools that we've talked about previously and only put down the bare amount of water that's really necessary. Also, if you're using some of the tips that we talked about here tonight, such as using native plants, native grasses, different things like that, reducing the amount of lawn that you have, you're also going to be reducing the amount of fertilizer that you're going to need to use, and thus the amount of fertilizer that ends up in our local waterways. Sometimes people get a little confused about why fertilizer might be bad in our local waterways, but fertilizer, it helps plants grow. And that's great when it's on your lawn, but when that fertilizer finds its way into a nearby river, it helps the plants in there grow, mainly the algae. And when we get an excess of fertilizer and nutrients in a river system, that can actually lead to a harmful algal bloom, which has some pretty serious consequences for human health and animal welfare. So just do everything that you can to prevent these materials, these non-point source pollution, from getting into or being created in the first place and then being carried by water to a local waterway. And to do that, one of the best ways is a rain garden. So here we're going to kind of tie in together all the different concepts that we talked about, everything from choosing native plants and reducing your lawn area to understanding your soil, all comes together when we talk about rain gardens. So rain gardens are basically landscaped depressions that naturally collect water runoff, either stormwater runoff or runoff from your lawn, things like that. And it collects all of that water and the pollutants that are found in that water. Then the plants and the soil microbes break down and filter out those pollutants before that water infiltrates into our groundwater system. So it's a pretty cool landscape feature that both reduces the amount of water that you need to use and protects our local waterways. So to do a rain garden, you can divert gutters into this landscaping feature like you see here in this picture, or you can divert water from your driveway, sidewalk, things like that. And then any oil and grease from your car or excess fertilizer from your lawn is going to be filtered out by the rain garden instead of ending up in a storm drain and eventually a local river. So to build a rain garden, you're going to pick an area that naturally collects water. If you've got a pretty flat landscape, you can pick an area to dig out a little bit to intentionally divert water into it. But you're going to need to create some kind of depression. And the size and shape of your depression is going to depend a little bit on your soils. So if you've got those soils that have a much higher water holding capacity, your rain garden won't need to be quite as big because it's going to be able to absorb a lot more water and hold it in place. Alternatively, if you've got it's the other way around. If you've got a rain garden with something like clay that holds that water, You might need a bigger area because you don't want to create a pond with as much water as you're diverting into there. If you've got a rain garden with something like sand, that water is going to infiltrate very quickly and you will need a smaller rain garden. So once you've picked your area and you've created your depression, make sure that you've got a site for overflow, because if we have a major storm event, you don't want to just have your lawn fill up as a pond, right? And then what you're going to do is you're going to line the bottom with larger stones so that that water kind of has somewhere to sit in the pond and you're not creating too much mosquito habitat or anything like that. Although you shouldn't really have water for more than standing water for more than a short period of time. Then you're going to plant in zones, kind of going from the inside out. So zone A is the more water-loving plants. They like to get their feet wet. Zone B is sort of on the lip of the rain garden up the side. And those are plants that like occasional water, but they can also handle not having so much water. And then finally in zone C, or on the outside edge of your rain garden, is plants that are going to be more drought tolerant. All right. And you can see all that in the diagram here. Now, if you're interested in building a rain garden at your house or any site that you have, even a business, I would recommend checking out another program that we have that's called the Flathead Rain Garden Initiative. I think Michaela is going to, if she hasn't already, post a link to the Flathead Rain Garden Initiative website. And this program is a joint program between the Flathead Conservation District and the city of Kalispell. And through this program, we can come out to your site and look at your property and help you determine the best area to build a rain garden, what sources of water you should be diverting into the rain garden. And then we'll go as far as to help you design it, provide a lot of technical background and guidance. And then we also have a limited amount of grant funding that may be available for the purchase of the native plants. So if you want to sign up for that program, check out the website and contact us as soon as you can to get signed up. It's a pretty cool initiative. All right, now the last thing I'm going to touch on is riparian areas and wetlands. So this brings together, again, a lot of, oh, did I use the same photo? There we go. Riparian areas and wetlands. So this brings together a lot of the same topics that we've already covered. Again, like rain gardens, riparian areas and wetlands are important features and are going to improve soil health and reduce the amount of water that we need. So it's all kind of bringing these concepts together. There are some main functions of riparian areas and wetlands that are important to landowners. And this is a little bit specific to landowners that live near water. So I'll keep this brief, but there's a lot more information out there, or you can contact our office if you want to go into this more. But in general, the functions of riparian areas and wetlands is that they provide a lot more biodiversity. So they are the intersection between aquatic habitats and more terrestrial habitats. They're that zone right along the side of waterways. And because of that, they just support a lot more life, a lot more insect life, soil microbes, birds, wildlife, vegetation, you name it. There's just a lot more biodiversity in these areas. And then they also act like a sponge. So all that root mass and organic material that's created from this vegetation has a really high water holding capacity. So when we have spring runoff, all of that soil acts like a sponge and soaks up a bunch of that water. Then in times of drought, that giant sponge that is a wetland or a riparian area slowly releases that water back into our streams and prevents our streams from completely going dry. Another function is that they act like a filter. So much like a rain garden is going to be capturing runoff and filtering out pollutants before it enters our waterways, riparian areas and wetlands do the same thing. As that stormwater runoff and that non-point source pollution is headed towards our waterways, flowing across the surface of the land, it hits that riparian area and is literally captured by the root mass, the soil, and the vegetation that's there in that riparian area. And then the soil microbes and the plants can actually break some of those pollutants down before it flows in, before the water flows into our streams. And then finally, these riparian areas also shade the water. Now, as a lot of you know, our fisheries are adapted to cold, clear waterways, and shade is important for keeping our streams cold. So these riparian areas with the taller, deep-rooted vegetation do a great job of that. So if you have a riparian area or a wetland at your property, as far as gardening for water conservation, the biggest thing that you can do is not to damage these areas. If you've got a riparian area, do everything you can to keep it intact. Plant more species, don't mow your lawn right up to it, limit the amount of fertilizer and herbicide you're using. Just do everything that you can to maintain that deep-rooted native vegetation. Now, since I know that's not applicable to folks unless they live on a waterway, I will leave it there, but know that we have a ton of resources for managing a riparian area or a wetland here at the office. And if you do live in that situation, please give us a call. We'd love to give you some more information on how to manage that for your benefit and the benefit of our natives, our natural systems. So with that, and hopefully I didn't go too over my time.
No, lots of great information. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
But we have no questions so far in the chat box. So if anyone has a question, feel free to either place them in the chat box or you can unmute yourself to ask a question. Also, if you click participants at the very bottom, there's a handy little tool that shows up to raise your hand. It's also another way to ask a question, but please don't be shy and ask away. Well, while we wait for some questions to come in, I just want to let everyone know about our survey. I'm going to copy it here into the chat box. We'd love if you could take no more than 2 minutes of your time to just fill out a survey. Let us know what you thought of the webinar. And again, this will just help us improve these events in the future. Great, we have a question from Sue. She's asking, where is the demonstration garden?
Great question. I'm sorry I failed to mention that. Here at the Flathead Conservation District office, we have our demonstration garden, and we started that project a couple years ago with the intention of using the space to show people firsthand all these different conservation practices that we talk about at work all the time. So, you know, whether we're talking about cover crops or noxious weed management or gardening for water conservation or installing a rain garden, we wanted to have a site where we could take people out and literally show them how to do these things. So we built the demonstration garden, which is still a work in progress, located right next to our office. The address is 133 Interstate Lane, Kalispell. But if you're a little bit familiar with the area, we're in Evergreen, just behind Joanne Fabrics and the Franz Bakery off of LaSalle. So ideally, we would have been teaching these workshops on site at the demonstration garden, and we would have been able to take a tour and get our hands dirty and learn some things hands-on, but unfortunately, we have been forced by circumstances to transition to webinars. So maybe next year you all can come out to the demonstration garden. But in the meantime, if you want a tour of it, anyone's welcome at any time. It's open to the public.
Haley, are there any water conserving practices that you're hoping to implement on your own property, aside from those that you already have?
Well, personally, I hate mowing lawns, so I'm doing everything I can to convince my husband that we don't need one at all. I don't know if I'm going to win that battle, but in the meantime, we've done a pollinator plot and a rain garden, and I have several containerized plant and mulch areas that I've implemented. So I'm slowly whittling away the amount of lawn that I have to mow and water. So yeah.
Great. We had a few more questions come in. So we have a question, does rock mulch have any potentially detrimental effects on the growth or spread of rhizomatous plants?
Great question. So it'll depend a little bit on plant to plant, but in general, no. The rock mulch, they're going to come up pretty well through it. What you'll want to be careful of is if you've done a weed matting. So if you've put that weed matting down, whether you're using rock mulch or more traditional wood mulch, those rhizomes are going to have a harder time coming up through that weed matting. The rock mulch seems to do fine. We have some here at the demonstration garden, and I've got some at my house too. And a lot of those plants that spread seem like they come up great. The one thing I'd be careful of if you're worried about it is keep your substrate size a little smaller. You can get rock mulch that's got pretty big components to it. Maybe focus on something that's more the like 1 to 2 inch size rock would be my best recommendation.
Great, thank you. And we have another question about mulch, asking about using pine needles for mulch, also using in a raised bed as well.
Yeah, I know that pine needles are really popular as a mulch in the South. In fact, they're sold in bales, and like my mother-in-law, she uses them in her landscaping all the time. I just think it's just not as popular here. I don't know that there's any reason you can't do that. My one concern would be that if you were using that as a mulch right up against your house, keep in mind that that is a very flammable material. And if you live in the wildland urban interface, you might want to consider wildfires and if you're creating a bed for sparks. But otherwise, I would say that pine needles would be fine as a mulch and would work great in a raised bed too.
Great, let's see. Another question of someone who is out on the East Coast and seeing mushrooms appear on the lawn. Is that caused by too much water?
So great question. It can be a combination of different factors. We did have a really rainy spring this year, and I think that may have led to it. It's not necessarily that you're overwatering. It may also be what's in your soil. Mushrooms and mushroom spores do better in different soil types, so that may have something to do with it. But in general, I think this year is just a really good mushroom year. A lot of people seem to have them. So I wouldn't be too concerned about it though. A better indicator would be to do that step test we talked about and make sure that your grass actually needs watered before you turn the water on.
Great. We have another question of where does one find red clover seeds?
Great. So red clover is available tons of places. You can probably get red clover seeds at places like Murdoch's, the Ag Center. I know for sure that red clover is available at CHS. And if you want a specific amount, because I know sometimes it's sold in large quantities for more of an agricultural use, you can work with the agronomy department at CHS to get what you specifically need. But keep in mind the red clover is going to produce a flower. It's a great pollinator species, but if you want something for more of a lawn that doesn't have a flower, go online and get some of the micro clover.
Great, thank you. We have another question. Are warm season grasses hardy in Montana? Will they go dormant over fall/winter but still return and thrive in the spring?
Yeah, so warm season and cold season grasses, it doesn't refer so much to where they do best. It more refers to at what temperature they, like you mentioned, go dormant and break dormancy. So warm season grasses, in general, they will do fine. Now you're going to want to, just like everything, there's going to be some varieties that do better in places like Florida, but a lot of the standard warm season grasses and what you're going to find available locally are going to be the warm season grasses that do well here. So Bermuda grass might be one of those that it will go dormant, it will turn brown in the wintertime, but it will come back next year.
Then we have another question regarding mulch. So what would you recommend for mulch in flower beds that are near mature pine trees that shed lots of needles?
Okay, so if you don't want the needles in your mulch, one thing that you can do that's pretty easy is you can take a leaf blower and blow the pine needles out of whatever existing mulch you have. Otherwise, you could use the pine needles themselves as a mulch. You could incorporate them into like a wood chip mulch. But if you've got that rock and you like kind of the cleaner look of just the rock mulch without the pine needles, that's when you'd make use of the weed blower and try to get those out. It can be a bit of a challenge, but if you stay on top of it, just like your leaves, it'll be all right.
Great. We have no more questions at the moment, so I'm going to just share the link for the survey one more time for people to get a chance to go on and fill that out. Again, if you have a question, you feel free to unmute yourself as well.
How long is the turnaround for applying for one of the programs that you all brought up and actually starting doing one of them?
Great. So it depends a little bit on the program and the season. So if you are applying for, say, the Pollinator Initiative program, there might still be time. If you had, if you were ready to get going right away on site prep, you could maybe get a seeding in this fall. But more likely, you're probably going to need to do some site prep this fall and then seed in the spring. Kind of the same with the Rain Garden Initiative. If you are interested in building a rain garden and you are pretty gung-ho about it and you had some availability to have us come out and do a site visit and get you signed up and get your plants ready and get digging, you could get a rain garden installed this fall still. But we're sadly approaching the end of the planting season here in about a month. So that's kind of more the limiting factor than anything else.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
We have another question that came in asking about micro clover for the lawn on the East Coast in terms of wild rabbits and kind of what the issue might that be with that wildlife. And
oh, that one might honestly be outside my expertise. I would assume that rabbits eat clover. And so I could see how that might be an issue, but I honestly, I don't have a whole lot of information for you on that one. I'm so sorry.
Kind of a follow-up too for that is what is the best on the East Coast and city water in particular?
As far as what you should plant when you can, whoever asked that question, can you give a little bit more information about what you mean by what you're doing with city water?
I'm not sure of the name, but whoever is Galaxy, yeah, feel free to unmute yourself and got followed up with by watering lawn.
So if you mean, like if you're worried that your city water has something like chlorine in it and might affect your lawn, there's not really a whole lot you can do about that except plant species that are tolerant to some of those chemicals or just need very little water in general. If you're worried about having a water bill because you're on city water, your best strategy is to just plant as many drought tolerant plants as you can and reduce the amount of lawn that you have. So unless you've got any more clarifying information, I think that's the best I've got.
I would say too, if you're in a city location as well, building a rain garden is a great way to handle that water that's coming off in a more populated area as well.
Yeah, good call.
Any more questions at all? Hope everyone's taking time to fill out the survey. Great, well, we will hang out for a little bit longer if anyone has any last minute questions. Again, if you can take time to fill out that survey, that'd be great. And we are here for any more questions at all, but thank you all so much for attending.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate you tuning in, and you're always welcome to call the office or check out those web pages for additional information. We're happy to continue talking with you, so we'll stay online for a bit longer, like Michaela said.
What were the, like, you had an image of a downspout that went underneath the lawn and then came up and watered a tree. What was that called again?
I refer to it as a gutter downspout extension. I'm not sure if that's the proper name for it, but I think if you just Google that term, you'd find what I was looking for. I'm pretty sure that's what I typed in to find that picture. So
thanks.
Yep.